tap room when we were there.
That's
yeah.
So
there can't be that many Fitzgibbons.
There's not. People throw S's on the end. I'm like, I'm just one Fitzgibbon. Luckily,
yeah.
More of us.
But I got involved with FireMaker when I moved to Atlanta. Just looking for jobs, honestly looking for lab jobs, but we all know how many of them there are.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really find one. And then I wound up with the cellar lab resident scientist hybrid
I've seen a lot of other lab positions and like across Atlanta and across the Southeast for sure.
I mean, it's a really good crossover because you're already in the cellar. You've got to go there to get all of your lab samples. And we're just kind of slowly building one thing at a time. So I have a fully functioning lab, but we don't plate anything just yet. We have the capability of it, but we don't. I mostly just do yeast health and QA, like can line QA and stuff like that, and data and super fun stuff.
Like, I love it. Data.
Yeah. It is a far cry from the lab at Terrapin when I worked there. That was a different ballgame.
And they've got that huge new sustainability push, which I'm sure is like crossing over in the lab some. That sounds really cool.
Sure. I don't know if it is. I haven't heard anything about it crossing over into the lab. I saw friends at work there. I think that mostly was like like they did wastewater while I was there. They had the wastewater treatment, but that was actually maintenance and utilities that took care of that. We didn't do any of the BOD or COD. That was all like we sent it off to the state and they did that. So yeah, I don't know.
We've been some more wastewater stuff because we're just doing Brew was over and we were doing a little bit of a renovation in the Fermentation Space. We're trying to do a whole new like wastewater treatment setup. So I've been doing a little bit of that lately. I'm like, oh, this is fun. I wish
it's not fun.
I want to talk about that with you at some point.
You've got a what?
I want to talk to you about that at some point.
I got you, girl. It's I mean, I'm doing like super basic level right now, and we use that Hawk UV Vis spec, and they have those TNT tests that are just like all in one file, super easy.
Oh.
But it's doable on a lot of different, specs and stuff. But we also have a sampler and send stuff out to the city and send it out to an external. We just use the stuff in-house to like compare to what we're actually getting and see where our highest points of like phosphorus and CO2 are coming from.
That's kind of something I'm just started interacting with in the past like month or so. I mean, we do the whole thing once a monthly, so it's like not enough time to fully get into it, but
time of the day. Most days.
Yeah, or y'all are probably hitting the Atlanta City water crackdown this year, right? I'm sorry.
Like what? And what do you mean?
Like I think because we were built right when they were enacting it, and I think breweries that were already established were given like an extra year for like adherence to the phosphorus and the pH levels. I think they changed.
Ours has always been like we have active pH for wastewater. I check daily, and that's always the main thing. Is we're trying to honestly get like our insane like remediation costs under control.
I have no idea what ours cost. I know I'm in charge of checking everything, but I have no idea how much they actually charge us.
Yeah, well, they determine it by a check. They come for a week, and they'll just like check every day.
So and that's what they do for us too,
which is insane. But yeah, I was doing our sustainability benchmarking for a while, and so I had access to all the bills, and I was like, oh my goodness.
You see, I don't see the bills. I'm just told it's got to be better.
Yeah, it's expensive. Like our remediation costs. I mean, because you're putting like yeast down the drain, like it's gonna, it's gonna be a lot of work to remediate that with oxygen demand. So
Well, even though we're already talking about science, I'm going to stop us real fast and just say we're officially live. It's 6 o'clock. So hello, everybody watching now or later. So this is officially the third virtual session today for the Crafted for Action Craft Beer Conference. So virtual session number 3, focusing on the science of brewing better beer. And when the three of us were actually talking earlier last week about what exactly that meant to us and what we wanted to cover, we kind of went ahead and broke it into 2 concepts, which is something I'll discuss, looking at kind of lab program and quality program. So that's going to be the focus of this session. And I'm sure we'll take tangents because we are scientists and somewhat geeky nerds. So it'll ebb and flow, but we'll always try to get back there. So we're going to focus on building a lab and quality program at a startup, its evolution in a brewery as it grows, and kind of what that effect is on the end result. The end result, of course, being beer. And in some other cases, maybe not, like you just heard us talking about wastewater. So there are other things as well. I'm going to go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves. Before I do that, I am going to be looking at the comments. So I already see, hi ladies, hello. So if you have any questions or want us to cover something, please let us know. We're pretty open to what we discuss. But yeah, so I'm going to have our 2 panelists. I'll start with myself, and then I'm going to have our 2 panelists talk about kind of their occupation / title and at what brewery they are with. Their background, whether that's education, professional, personal, whatever background brought them to where they are today. And then I want to know what their favorite beer is at their brewery, but also not at their brewery, because as we know, sometimes you drink more of your brewery's beers than others. So I want to know what else you're drinking. So my name is Brianna Chilton. I'm going to be the moderator. I run the lab at Tucker, both the microbiology side and the quality assurance side, or all quality aspect side. So yeah, I'm going to go clockwise with Dallas first.
I'm Dallas Fitzgibbon. I didn't put my last name on there like you guys. I was a bad student. I am the lab manager at Monday Night Brewing, and my education was in general biology. I was originally interested in marine sciences, which kind of had us talking about wastewater and water quality in general. And I found out I was allergic to fish, so I quit, and I became interested in craft beer, which I'm not allergic to yet. So I'm enjoying it. I've been in this position, well, in myriads of positions for 4 or 5 years at Monday Night, I think, starting as a bartender, lab tech to lab manager. So yeah, that's all I got. Oh, am I supposed to know what beers I like?
Yeah.
Monday Night beers, Taco Tuesday is my go-to, is Mexican lager for like drinking in the evenings. Light, it's crisp, it's refreshing. I got kind of tired of all the like crazy craft beers after a couple of years in the industry. And then outside of Monday Night, I'm a sucker for most things Sierra Nevada. I mean, their pale ale is kind of a classic go-to, and I have a ton of respect for their quality program and their sustainability program. So I really like to support them when I get the chance. So,
that sustainability program is amazing.
Insane.
Yep. All right, and Desiree.
My name is Desiree. I head up the cellar and the lab and the beginnings of a quality program at the startup brewery Firemaker. We've been open about almost a year and a half now, just a little bit over a year. And I'm in charge of building it from the ground up while also running a cellar at the same time, and sometimes pressure washing a parking lot because I've got to do all the jobs. There's only, I think, 5-ish full-time employees there at the moment. So I wear a lot of hats, and my background is in food science. I got a degree in food science, technology, and engineering at the University of Georgia. And then I worked at Terrapin, and that was my place of many jobs. I started in the tap room there. I gave tours. I was a draft tech. I got a lab internship, and then I worked in the lab for a little while. I ran the sensory panel there as well. And I also did employee education on beer server Cicerone, so I did a lot of like taproom employee education when I was there. And I also had a short stint in sales when I first moved to Atlanta, but that is my background and what I do. And then my favorite beer at my brewery is the Hazed and Blazed. That is just a New England style hazy IPA. It's one of our flagship beers. A fresh Hazed and Blazed honestly tastes like fresh squeezed orange juice, and it's delicious. And my favorite beer of all time is actually an import, but it's a Hefeweizen because I love German style beer. But locally, I think it's actually the Second Self Mole Porter. I love that beer. It's a weird one, but I love it. And the guys over there are all awesome. But yeah, that's me.
Excellent. And I didn't tell my beer, so I'm going to. My favorite beer at Tucker Brewing right now, honestly, is our Pilsner. I just love a good, nice drinking Pilsner. I'm drinking the Georgia Red right now. I feel like I should be promoting our summer beers, but love a Pilsner. And outside of Tucker, honestly, I am a sucker for Hefeweizens, all things wheat. Avery White Rascal has been one of my favorites for a long time. And I don't know if y'all seen that lab. Oh, my husband showed you a picture last night, Desiree. They've got a beautiful lab.
We did not.
I'll show you the picture, Dallas.
A girl can dream.
Works there, and they used to have a tiny lab. So that's inspiration for all of us.
And that's something we're going to cover. So, and actually, Desiree, you mentioned coming from Terrapin, the brewery you're at now is 5-ish full-time. Dallas, both have D names. Dallas, how many people are full-time at Monday Night right now, just to kind of give a scope difference?
Ebb and flow, I'm not sure. I know we have exponentially grown with adding more locations in the past. I think we're in the 40s, 50s,
okay.
100% though.
Okay. And so that's something I did want to focus on, is the fact that we have kind of, small to bigger coming from Terrapin. So we have a good amount of kind of size scale differences here. So I was going to start with a nerd joke and just say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the lab or quality? What comes first in your opinion? But more so, what is your interpretation of?
Uh-oh, you froze.
I think I caught some of that though.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, the idea of like having a lab or a quality system in place first. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, so I was going to say, which comes first, the lab or the quality? But more so, being serious, what is your interpretation of these two programs? How are they different and how are they alike?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, actually. And I think that a large role in quality is making that culture in your brewery. And that's, like I said, I was doing some roles in sustainability and sensory and safety. And it all really does come down to, having everyone on board in your brewery with that if you want your lab to be successful. Because, you're not going to be able to be there all the time. You need to have the brewers, your sales team, the packaging team, everyone having quality in the, forefront of their mind if you want to continuously have a quality program. So that's what I think. I think quality as an idea and as just like a feeling in a brewery comes way before the lab.
What about you, Desiree?
I would agree. And also watching it kind of develop from the very beginning, quality and the little things that go into increasing quality are the first things that you can kind of implement. And then later on, you can kind of develop a lab, develop that area. But if you don't have quality, then the lab really can't do too much for you, from what I've found, large and small scale. But she's right, like you need that culture, and I would completely agree. Even if it's just starting from the beginning, hey, I need you to pay attention to fill levels, something simple. But I think it definitely starts there. And then as things get more complex, I think the lab becomes more necessary, but I would say quality first.
Excellent. Okay, so what is your first piece of equipment or the first test you're implementing in your program?
Ooh, this is like make pretend, huh?
Yeah, you're starting over, Dallas.
That'd be that's too much pressure. But honestly, I think a really overlooked part of the lab is like counter space and electrical like ability, because it's not like the glamorous fun toys you get, but you run out of counter space so fast. I mean, the same in the brewery. I think space is always a limiting factor, but counter space in particular to run like assays and tests and have bench space, that's something I would focus on if I were to redo the lab at Monday night for sure.
Interesting. So yours is not so much more like the first thing that you're doing. It's more of just seeing where that space is going to be and where you're going to start setting up to start building that program.
Yeah, I think that everyone is always like, get a microscope and, get a geometer. And that's great, but you have to have the space and obviously the skilled technicians or like people that are interested in learning to really implement that. Like you can have all of the fancy toys in the world and produce all the data, but if you're not able to set that out and have a way to like efficiently move through the lab, then I just feel like, well, me personally, I would be bumping into everything.
Absolutely. What about you, Desiree?
Like the first piece of equipment, I forgot the exact question.
Yeah, what would be the first piece of equipment you would buy, or what's the first test you're implementing as you're kind of starting in this development of a program?
Okay. The first piece of equipment I would buy, I'm trying to think of the first piece of equipment I did buy. I actually think it was a sieve set was the first piece of equipment I bought, because it doesn't really require a lab and it's kind of base level quality for industrial brewing. You can save, it's the first simplest thing you can do, or you can save money. You can kind of fine tune a mill, because we have a pretty fancy mill considering we only have a 20-barrel brew house. We have a 4-roll mill, but
can you explain what that is for somebody who maybe doesn't know?
The mill or the sieve?
Oh, the sieve. That is, I'm sorry, it must have glitched when you said that. I gotcha.
Oh, okay, yeah. So like a sieve set, just to basically fine tune our crush on our malt so that we can get the most out of the malt that we're using and save money at the end of the day. If we can use less malt, that's awesome. If we can save time, that also saves money. Depending on what my brewer wants, I can figure it out. But I think that was actually the very, very first thing I worked on. If I were going to do it myself, though, I would probably get a bigger lab. I'm just gonna concur with her on that one, because I didn't actually build out my lab, and it's
hard
great
to go
for
back.
the use it has now, but it is not going to be big enough in 5 years if the brewery grows the way it's growing. Mm-hmm. Oof. But and then when I was at Terrapin, we shared a closet between, goodness, there were 4 of us working in the lab, and it was a converted office.
Yep.
With no air conditioning. So it was a bunch of bumping into each other and no counter space, no room for anything. So I can definitely relate to no room for equipment, no room for paperwork, no room for anything. But yeah, that's I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, well, that's actually kind of goes along perfect, because we actually have a question from Cynic Cup. It says, are there certain things that must be in beer in order for it to taste good, chemicals, etc.? Which I think kind of relates to your sieve set thing, because that is, going along with stuff that's going into beer. So how would y'all answer that question?
I think water chemistry is not very sexy and overlooked part of beer that honestly I am constantly figuring out day to day. But that is huge on figuring out your source water, figuring out what kind of filters you want to put on, and your brewing salts. Water is a lot of beer, and I think that hops and malt and everything else, yeast obviously take the front stage, but that's a big one for me that I think is, again, important to focus on when you're starting up a brewery, because I've been to some breweries where I'm like, ooh, this water, I think they need to work on. You can taste it.
And can you kind of give an idea of what maybe you should be looking for, or what you should be doing in terms of approaching water when you are dealing with a startup brewery?
Yeah, so an example that we focus on a lot is hardness. For a while, we were like kind of tinkering with our softener and just kind of getting that in balance so you don't have like a too sharp of a bite on that finished product.
So I mean, definitely. So when you're starting a brewery, something that you want to do is test your water.
Right, obviously. Yeah.
And get to know.
Send that out. Atlanta sends out reports as well, but those are only yearly. We have a pretty simple setup right now, but we also have a spec that we're planning on potentially implementing some more advanced tests on. But they make them for home brew kits. They make a little bit more advanced kits for bigger breweries, but at the end of the day, it's a similar thing. It's just figuring out how much of what you have in that water and how you want to alter it to better suit the style of beer you're brewing.
Excellent. So Atlanta Beer Boutique asked a question. How much space should a brewery set aside ideally for the lab?
I'll take this one.
I'll go for it.
I think that honestly comes down to the owner and getting with your scientist, getting your scientist on early before you build the lab, of course, and figuring out, how big you want to be. Do you want to be a big distribution network like Monday Night or Terrapin or Sweetwater, where you're going out of state or even overseas? Then, of course, you're going to need a higher quality program. You've got to meet all these standards. You need more staff, so you need a lot more space, bigger equipment, fancier things. Or do you just kind of want to be a standard craft brewery, like you put your heart and soul into? You don't really ever want to get too big. You just want to be that right size that everybody loves. Then maybe you don't need more than a closet. But it just kind of depends on how much emphasis do you want to put on quality and consistency? How much money do you want to put into it long term? Because like you said, you can make it smaller, but you can't really make it bigger. You can't make any more room typically unless you find it somewhere else. So I would say that's kind of it just depends on how big you want to be. Because some people don't have a lab at all and they do just fine. So it kind of all depends.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off of that, as long as you have a dedicated space to start off with, that's huge. Because that also helps reinstate the idea that quality is important at your brewery. If we're building this place from scratch or buying this place from scratch, we're gonna dedicate this room to quality. I don't know. I think that just makes an impact of we're not just we've been a brewery for a couple years and there's this old office that no one uses anymore. You guys could go set up a lab in there. It kind of just makes it more of an integral part of your brewery.
That's great. So Darren, before I get to your question, I wanted to kind of ask our panelist here. So we kind of started this idea with what I think of as the beginning of the process, right? I thought it was perfect, Desiree. Something that I had written down was actually okay, where do we start? Grain, the mill, kind of what starts those quality checks. And we brought that into water. Before we actually get into the fermentation side of things, what other lab or quality procedures have y'all developed leading into that kind of initial actually brewing stage from where you started to where you are now?
So as far as what kind of data do we collect from the brew house, or what do we? So I'm actually relatively hands off on the brew house. I'll do water quality checks, but a lot of our brewers are trained to get all of their gravity readings and pH readings themselves and write that down. And honestly, they know more about what that means to them than I do. So there's a big amount of cross training there. And I think that's all I got. You may have some more, Desiree, being more hands-on in the cellar.
I might have a little bit more. I don't know how much more I can help you. even on our small scale, it's kind of the same. The head brewer or whatever brewer is on the deck that day, they take their own gravities, they take their own pHs and everything, and they hit their targets because they know what their targets are for that day based off of the recipe, and they also know how to adjust if they're out of target. So during the brew, I don't keep track of any of it. I mean, I have access to all those documents if I wanted to go back and look, but I don't really keep a close eye on that beyond just looking at it every now and then. I do mill quality or mill adjusting. That's part of me or my job. And then we don't do any inlet water testing. We have a carbon filter for our water. So our water actually comes in pretty much a blank slate, and we just add the salts necessary. Again, a brewer thing. It's whatever brewer's on the deck that day. He checks his numbers, makes sure he's good, and then hops and yeast. I do yeast. I guess that counts as before it's beer. So I do the yeast health, yeast pitching, yeast storage, all that.
And that's something that y'all implemented pretty early on, would you say?
I think it's been the last 6 months we've really been stepping up, repitching, and reusing our pitches and not doing a new pitch every time. Because of course, for our first year, it just made more sense to spend the money to get it done. And now it's okay. We can save X amount of dollars, which is a lot of dollars if you're trying to save money starting up.
Yeah.
A new pitch is like for one of our 40-barrel batches, it's over $1,000. And if you can save over $1,000 in 40 barrels, you know, we can split a pitch 2 ways at the moment. And if you have enough tank space, that's 6, 7 generations, sometimes 8. That's a lot of money.
What was the process of going from repitching every time, new pitching, pure pitching, to actually using your yeast over and over? What are some steps you?
I think I got that question, but you froze at the end. The biggest steps are collaborating and scheduling with the head brewer, because he's scheduling all these brews, and he also has to know kind of the best time to repitch that yeast when it's the healthiest. So he has to schedule his brews that are using that same strain, especially in a cellar as small as we are, where you're brewing at the optimal time to pitch that healthy yeast. So it's not going to be a dud, and you're not going to have to buy a new pitch anyway just to finish your fermentation. So I would say working closely with the brewer and figuring out, okay, when is this yeast going to be the healthiest? And then also him kind of working with me and making sure I have the time and the resources to do the cell counts and report the cell counts and get our pitch rate calculated and get the yeast pitch in a brew day. But yeah, I would say the first step with that is just scheduling. That's the hardest part when repitching yeast.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, scheduling meetings I'm not in, but everyone also always leaves and they're like, oh my God, that was rough.
Well, what does that look like for you, Dallas, on a larger scale?
Yeah, so we are pretty lucky to have a piece of equipment called the Perfect Pitch. I think we were talking about that a little bit, Bree.
Yes.
I've used one of those.
Oh my God.
I have not.
Those cellar folk living in luxury over there.
They're nice.
Counts. Yeah, I'll do counts still to make sure that is calibrated properly. And that's actually something I wanted to touch back on what you were saying, Desiree, is we're not super hands-on on the brew deck, but anytime there's an issue with with pH meters up there, we have density meters up there, they come running to me and being like, I don't think this is working right, like fix that. And I think that's a really overlooked part of quality, is just like making sure all of your equipment is properly calibrated on a certain schedule, which is like, again, not a very glamorous part of it, but a very necessary part of it. But I will usually work with our lead seller, who comes from Avery. He's there a while ago, and he will kind of flesh out, do the schedule, what is our best potential sources, I'll count between a couple sources, and we'll pitch from that using our perfect pitch, which is a really cool technology that.
Will you explain it just in case anybody doesn't know?
Yeah. And again, I'm like super surface level on this. Aaron is our cellar manager, and he is very unfortunately intimate with it after all of the calibrations he's done. But you will essentially take your pitch and run it through the perfect pitch, cone to cone, and it will in live time do a pseudo count for you. So I'm essentially doing a count to make sure that that is worth like dirtying up the equipment to use, right? So if it's like a really low viability or a really low density, we'll look for another source. But once that system is calibrated, you can use the source that you already know has a pretty good count, and it'll just pitch the amount that you need according to this live check of cell per mill, which is pretty amazing. So they have it pretty nice.
That's nice. And are y'all doing propagation at all?
So we do have some prop tanks. We're hoping to start a really full program on that soon, but we are currently just keeping a really good eye on ours and stretching our generations out cone to cone as well as we can. And we also just have a couple strains in-house that we're able to use really effectively in a variety of beers. So not completely yet, but hopefully in the future, again, to save that money because yeast is very expensive.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so we have cast out, we have put yeast into our beer. What's kind of that next step of actual fermentation for you both look like? Next steps, because of course it doesn't happen overnight, but.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Right. I was just about to say, so we do a check about 24, 48 hours after fermentation, get sterile samples, plate it, look for any early potential spoilers. We'll also get dissolved oxygen checks on there just to trace our dissolved oxygen throughout the process. So those are the main stages. I have luckily passed off gravity duties to the cellar recently because it's been busy in the lab. So they'll take gravity readings, they'll take pH readings. I'll double check yeast counts if something's moving or stagnant. We used to do forced fermentations, but a lot of our brands we know pretty well by now, so we no longer have to do forced fermentations. And touching back on what Darren was saying about diacetyl, we will do what's called a forced diacetyl check before our dry hopping or before our crashing, just to get an idea. And that's just completely sensory based, super easy for startup. We actually have like a pseudo water bath that we made out of a cooler and a sous vide. So very easy test.
That's awesome.
Super easy check. And it kind of ties back into sensory. Get some spike kits or just get some general training on diacetyl down, and that's like a really nice, really easy check that we have 4 or 5 of our staff go through. And that way you can see that it's cleared before you dry hop or add any adjuncts, kind of as your first check. And then you can do a second check because there is that potential for hop creep with diacetyl before you crash it. But I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more later. I just saw that in the queue. So.
Yeah, well, and since we're talking about it, Desiree, I'll come back to you, but I was kind of going to ask, how to best minimize that flavor into your finishing beer. I mean, there's an answer I'm thinking about that I'm wondering how to get to, but, what does that look like for you in terms of having to minimize that?
Yeah, because, it's always... Thanks, Dan. It's always at odds of like tank turn times, right? So I'm sure being cellar and quality is pretty tricky for you, Desiree. You're like, I want to turn this tank, but I want to make sure it passes all my quality checks. I'm always butting heads with our cellar folk and our brew folk and our brewmaster being like, we need to wait. So essentially, we are really fortunate to have a UV vis spec, which will give us a numerical value. So a spectrophotometer, which will give us a numerical value of what the diacetyl is. So it measures VDK, which is a vicinal diketone, And then we get a number there that essentially represents a threshold. And this is such a wormhole we could go down, and I'm sure we might. But I actually was listening to a presentation the other day about focusing on the on flavors instead of the off flavors. I feel like in beer, we focus a lot on the off flavors. We're almost like searching for them, and we're trying to establish like these parameters that they fall within. But in the VDK is definitely one of them, or diacetyl. So, you know, each type of beer has a different threshold based on style. So we're also looking into that. And it's like, if we can't detect it and we can't sense it, and we're getting a higher than we'd like VDK, it's like this whole back and forth with quality versus is it noticeable? And also sitting on dead yeast could potentially bring up other issues. So I don't know if that's a great answer. It's diacetyl's a struggle. FGTs, I think, are a great place to start. They're a really easy test to run, and we do it pre-dry hop, post-dry hop, and can retest it if, like, there's been times when our VDK values are really low, but, you know, one of folks tasting it or smelling it gets some hint of something. So it just reiterates the idea that sensory is going to always be a really calibrated sensory panel is almost better than a really calibrated any piece of quality equipment, unfortunately. So having both the like human tasting and the analytical is like a really good balance for us to figure out where we want to go and how we want to move the tanks ahead, I guess is my finishing statement.
It's kind of what I was getting at, is that balance of,
yeah,
I don't think it passes. I know you need this tank, but
right. And it's also like there's going to be biases, right? Like we are intended to be the unbiased people in the brewery, but then there's the lead seller person or the packaging team, and they're like, well, I don't taste anything. It's fine. Let's go. Like we got tanks prepared. You're like, no.
So Desiree, heading back kind of to the beginning of the question and maybe ending in diacetyl, since that kind of also deals with crashing and the end of that fermentation. What does that look like for you? Yeast is in beer, or we're in the fermenter. What are the checks along that way for you?
Pretty much the same across the board. We do gravities, of course. I still do gravities because I also do the cellar. We also do pH. I don't know if you mentioned pH. That was a while ago. So we monitor pH as well. Again, just to make sure the yeast is still happy, healthy. We're continuing fermentation because even after terminal gravity, we'll see a shift in pH, which kind of shows it may be terminal, but it's maybe not quite finished. And it tells us a few other things in there. We also do a diacetyl rest in almost all of our beers as well. So that would also help with diacetyl, which just requires more tank time. Just don't be in a rush to turn tanks, kind of touching on what you said. That's the cure-all for getting rid of diacetyl. We also recently started experimenting with an enzyme that I know in other large breweries, I don't know if I can name them, but they use an enzyme pre-ferm that actually is supposed to reduce diacetyl presence after dry hopping. So that hop creep that you can get in that increased diacetyl presence, even if it passes a forced diacetyl, sometimes it may show up after you dry hop. That's a different rabbit hole we could go down, but I won't. That's, I would say, about it. We do a lot of physical quality checks in the cellar that I think definitely get overlooked in the lab as somebody who used to be solely lab. We check the pressure on our tanks every single day, our temperature to make sure our probes are in spec. We have digital as well as manual temperature probes on all of our tanks. Pressure to make sure, one, we don't have a tank over pressurizing or under pressurizing, which would tell us there might be a gasket leak somewhere on the tank. Temperature probes, of course, let us know that our beer's at the right temperature, which is super important. And then I think that's about it for quality parameters that we check on a regular basis, beginning to end. Yeah, I think can't think of anything else. And then we, bright tank, we do some other things, but I won't go into that just yet.
Well, you can. That's where we're heading next.
Okay.
So what is kind of the next steps for y'all once y'all hit that terminal? You've got your diacetyl handled, your additives, if you're using additives, or what are those next steps leading into kind of packaging, pre-packaging, but post-fermentation, and what does that look like for you?
You go, Desiree.
Okay. Pre-packaging, post-fermentation. Ours is probably a lot simpler. So we do a direct transfer after we pull all the yeast off and all the hops off. I don't want to skip over that part. So we purge out all of the yeast, hops, anything we may have put in fermentation, depending on the brand. We will then move the beer off of that yeast and hops into the bright tank. We do not filter.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. We do not filter at the moment. Maybe one day, but as of right now, no filtration, no centrifuge, no nothing. We do have a filter. We have a plate and frame, but we only use it for seltzer sometimes. So we are unfiltered at the moment. Sometimes we fine. So our lagers and stuff, we will add finings to get that bright color. But then we transfer to bright and we carbonate. There are some brands where we actually add ingredients in bright as well. And that's about it. And we usually do a 3-day sit on carb to make sure everything gets a chance to settle in. And then we go straight to package. Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple.
All right, Dallas, how does that look like for you? And something that I wanted to ask about was you talked about how you've now plated at this point, and how does that maybe affect the next steps that are coming?
Right. And we've talked about in the past. You guys are definitely more plate heavy, and PhD over there.
I know. I've already had like 4 plates up to this point on 4 different medias.
Yeah, and going back into tank turn time, so DO, sterile sample, and plate at 24 to 48 hours after firm. And then again, after cold crash, we'll do the same thing, plate as well. And these are kind of just to help reiterate what we get as PCR results. So I'm currently plating on yeast malt agar, with cyclohexamide to get rid of our Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and then WLD and HLP. And as y'all may know, this process can take a while to give you substantial results. So unfortunately, sometimes by the time we get the results, it's already in bright tank. But I'm running PCR in bright tank. And that way, if I do get any potential spoilers that show up, I can go back to my plates and see if it's a false positive, see how many colonies are there, yada, yada, yada. Is that a question, Race?
Yeah, nerd question, though. Sorry to everybody listening. What PCR do you use?
Oh my gosh, Bray and I have already talked about this. We use the June
I love that. We got that as I was leaving Terrapin, so I only got to use it a couple times, but I love it. It's the best middle of the road.
Yes.
That's what we talked about last night.
Yes. We have really had a lot of success with it. We've trialed a couple different systems. It was there when I was there, when I started a couple of years back. But, we've had other PCRs companies reach out and be like, hey, you want to try ours? And we are pretty loyal to Gene Disc. We like their system a lot because it's, for us, quick turnaround time. I'm very jealous that you have 3 days to let your bright tank sit on carb.
Amazing.
We do not.
Give us a year. I won't be saying the same things. It'll be a different.
Maybe less than a year. It will last. Let me tell you.
I know. We hope it doesn't, though. That's the goal.
Yeah. I mean, hey, turning tanks quicker and getting beer out to people, as long as that quality sustained, is not a bad gig. We also have an inline carb, which helps us get our carb up to spec a little quicker. And we finally got rid of the ZOM, which was like the vein of my existence, because everyone reads a ZOM differently, no matter how hard you try. it's a manual piece of equipment that checks your carbonation, and depending on what angle you're tilting at, it could be a little different.
Summer's the best for those because it just
my
keeps
God.
moving.
You just gotta keep I'll be with you there. Yeah, dump out like a couple buckets full. Yep, been there. But now we're able to check with our DO unit. Actually, also can check carbonation. So we use that instead, and it's a digital meter. It's from Pentair, called the CDGM. So we'll do those checks before packaging in bright. Yeah, and those are our main cold crash to bright checks that I can think of right now. We also obviously have sensory before packaging by one of our
heading there next.
Lead seller, lead brewer, or me, just to be like, if there's anything outrageous that comes, there's a hard stop put on it, and we'll figure it out from there.
And so what does that look like for y'all? Is that, Desiree, are y'all doing kind of, that TTB, true to brand check before you're allowed to go to packaging? And if so, what does that look like for y'all? Like the actual physical of doing it? Is it just y'all in a room together? Is it?
It's probably different from me to her because, again, if I was at Terrapin, it would typically be our lead packaging person or a QA person. They would calm down and just pull it off the bright, take a sip right there in the cellar. Good to go, not good to go, package. Sometimes we would do sensory on it, like full panel. But right now it is whoever's packaging the beer, you drink the beer, and if that's what it's supposed to taste like, you put it in package.
But it is your package person.
Who is our package person?
No, but it is your package person per se, rather than like a
yes,
brewer.
Yes. So yeah, and then we do it for every brand. So not just our core brands, we do it for our pilot batches as well. Those, of course, aren't really true to brand, but you're just making sure you're not getting any off flavors, nothing weird or funky. Carbonation level is good. And yeah, so everybody who operates in our cellar who's trained to package at any capacity, whether it be, filling half barrels from our pilot tanks or running the can line for a 14-hour shift, we're all trained to look out for anything off brand. We don't do a full panel, of course. We are still petite, but that's it's on my list. It's a dream.
Let's do it. We can do it with 5 full-time employees. Come on.
Tell them that.
Get them all in one room is the hard part, right? Yeah,
that's the hard part. Yeah.
I made number 6 and I came into it being done, but Dallas, what does that look like for you?
So yeah, similar thing. We have, certain people that are on our sensory panel that are familiar with the specs we've set and are true to targets. We actually use Draft Lab. Quick plug for them. We've had really great success with them helping build these true to targets. And they taste it, they clear it. Again, with carb level, that's huge too, just making sure the mouth feels correct. Because, everyone is tasting these beers through process. It's another thing that we didn't really touch on, but we are tasting them through process. So, if you catch something, hopefully you'll catch it before it's to bright tank. But that's just like another quick check, and then packaged after that.
All right, so we are officially a go for packaging. Day of packaging, are there any kind of quality or lab checks that you two are involved in during the packaging process?
Yeah, I was going to say when we were talking about packaging, they are, at least the packaging team at Monday night is like huge in quality. They bring me checks as the can line's running. We do a check on dissolved oxygen, on carbonation before they're even allowed to continue their run. And I check throughout and check back in with them. That's been a place where I think but quality has really been championed over the past couple of years, because I'll get that data to them and then we'll work together to kind of like, if the carb is really dropping off or if our dissolved oxygen all of a sudden is high, like we can stop the line and in real time affect the change with that. And I think it's definitely something that happens in cellar and brewing as well, but it's something that I'm less hands-on with. So.
What about for you, Desiree?
Yeah.
So for me, just to give you guys a picture, we run a 2-man can line. We got one person running it and one person doing pack off. Usually neither one of those people is me. So I have my filler operator, whoever it is, trained to operate my piercer and my DO meter. And he actually has a log that he puts all of his DOs, and he's supposed to take DOs, I think it's every 20 cases or something like that on average. And
what,
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I have a nerdy question back for you with like the PCR one earlier. What DO meter are you using, and about what CPM does your canning line run? Your can, right?
So we do.
Okay.
We have the Orbis Viewer 3100, the portable
one.
Yeah, so we have the Orbis Viewer 3100, which I really like. I would love it if it had the combo CO2, but I'm told that's pricey.
With like your hazier beers on that?
We can. It came with a filter. So okay. I can put it direct. I can check bright DO. I can check can DO because I have a Zom piercer that I can modify it for. And all we have to do is there's a little filter you can put in it, and you switch that out from time to time because eventually it will get clogged.
I was about to say, we were using that when the haze craze started, and it would like clog that up before I could even get a reading.
So what happened was it clogged, and it ruined something in the machine that I had to fix under warranty, thankfully.
That is great.
And I put the filter. I don't know if you use it's a little black addition and like hose link that you add on with a filter in it, and that prevents that from happening. And I haven't had any issues since we did that, because we do, of course, unfiltered beer, we have to have it, but it hasn't given me any issues. We also use it for bright purge data, so we can just do gas, we don't have to do liquid. And yeah, so I have my filler operator do that, and then I also have them check seams and fills. Fills are the one thing that because it's a 2-man operation, we can't really have anybody write it down. We just have to make sure they're trained to know the target, and they're checking one every other case or so. So as of right now, we don't have anywhere to write any of that down except for the seams and the DO, but that's the biggest thing. And in real time, the filler operator, if any of those are off, he will shut it down and he will adjust it and then start back up. So that's
Do you set the levels by weight, by case, or by individual can? I'm just curious.
It is individual can on this fun little Amazon scale.
Yeah, girl, I know. We got one too. But we also have we are very lucky to have a fancy canning line that we got recently, and we also got an X-ray fill level detector. So
we used to have that at Terrapin with the kicker.
Yeah,
that was those were great.
But just the idea of like small to large, and I mean, I still check again individual cans by weight just in case to make sure that equipment is properly.
Yeah, and that's actually something too at Terrapin that I really liked. So we had our filler operator. So we called it the Hoif with the X-ray, with the kicker. Then we had a case weigher while I was there. So it checked it at 2 points on the line automatically. And then I don't remember what the checkpoint was, but every so many cases or pallets, the filler operator had to take a case or a handful and weigh them and get an average manually. And then in addition to that, a lab tech would go down, pull samples, and we would actually do average fill weights by gravity of the finished product. So we could get a more accurate fill level and volume rather than just weight.
Right.
And
so you type in and calculate all that out by the product with the can.
Yep. So we had, what is that now? 1, 2, 3, 4 points of just checking fill levels for one can run.
And honestly, that is a quality complaint that we get the most. To go back, like if you're starting a brewery or if you're an established brewery, like legally, obviously, you want to make sure your fill levels are correct, but also that's a lot of pop. Like the customer cares if their fill levels are too low or even too high. If you pop a top and it overflows into the can, fill levels are huge. They sound kind of monotonous, I guess, as we talk about them, but that's like
they are.
Once you start to feel those cans enough, though, you're like, oh, there's a tactical difference.
That's how we used to do on our old line. We'd have like a can squeezer just to make sure. So yeah, I've definitely come a long way. But
so from can squeezer to 4-point can filled.
Dude, yeah, from can squeezer to like insane European line with an X-ray system on it that we had to get verified by the state.
Wow.
They still get by though. I mean, even at Terrapin, we'd get the phone call. There was no beer in my can. And it's like, oh, it happens.
It's definitely, and I mean, I think that's just like pointing out why little things like fill level checks are super important.
Absolutely. Well, this brings us to kind of the end of the beer's journey where it's officially going out into market. And I wanted to kind of end on the sensory kind of what is the overall sensory, initial looks at but even bigger, how are you building that? And this goes along with Katie Wiles, who first asked, why do you use the title of cellar human versus cellar man? We're just being inclusive for anybody who wants to be a cellar person worker. But to the second question of what do you do to ensure that sensory analysis is consistent? Very, very large question, but paperwork, one opinion trumps all. We kind of answered it already, but maybe looking that also along with now our beer has left the brewery. What are we still doing with it?
Yeah, this was really hard about building a channel because obviously the people who are most hands-on are also most biased, and they also think that they carry those biases into sensory, whether they intend to or not. So we use Draft Lab, which I spoke to earlier, and I've talked to Brew about this in the past. She does.
And if you don't mind, I'll do a quick plug that she is actually doing one of the virtual sessions tomorrow. So anybody on here that is interested, especially Katie, I'm doing it. It looks really fun. So sorry, Dallas, keep going.
I was looking into that. It looks awesome. I'm behind anything she's doing because Draft Lab has been so nice. We're doing Google Sheets at first, and that's effective. So basically, start wherever you're at. I think sensory should, again, be part of your quality culture from like day one. We're not on the ball with that. And now that we are, it honestly makes a huge difference. We notice way more consistency in our product. We can make these minute changes with recipes or procedures moving forward. And luckily, we have a space where, like, once everyone's trained on sensory, everyone is very respectful of each other's opinions. There is definitely a hierarchy who makes the call of whether a product is held back, whether it's altered. But I think that overall, just having something in place and getting anyone who's interested involved is we want to start with sensory, because we have a lot of production folks, but honestly, a lot of really interesting insight comes from our marketing team, comes from our taproom team, comes from people that aren't so involved in the process because they don't have those biases.
And are either of y'all doing sensory on beer post packaging?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Some.
Desiree.
So for us, actually, this is something that reminds me, going back into like how to start a lab. Set aside space for a lab, and either in that lab or somewhere else in your brewery from day one, beer library.
Yes. I knew what you were going to say.
So much space.
Whether you do cold store or warm store, or we actually do both, you need a beer library. And That's important because if you get a customer complaint, even though we're all making amazing beer, sometimes people complain. You need to be able to go back and check that product, whether it be sensory or PCR or plating, however you need to do it, haze even. Fill levels, yeah.
Expiration dates. My favorite.
Yes, yeah. Even if it's just a situation of like, the date coder messed up, nobody caught it for an entire run sometimes. That's definitely something to add to the list of what you need. But we do a beer library as far as post-package sensory goes. And it's also a great way in sensory, or a way to bring sensory in an informal way to kind of teach, even if it's just your bar staff or the rest of your staff, what an out-of-date product tastes like. And kind of see how your beer ages, doing shelf life studies. Again, a different rabbit hole we could go down. That's beers left the building. We do a beer library just in case we have any issues that come up in the market. Exploding cans, even having an unfiltered product. We have not had any, and we will not have any, but you always want to make sure. And then, yeah, I think once it leaves the brewery, that's about all we do. Just keeping a record of everything. That way, if someone does call, you can say, all right, well, we checked the fills, we checked the seams, we checked the everything. I have documentation. It was probably just a bad can, not a bad run. But yeah, I think that's about what we do when it leaves the building. I don't think I missed anything.
I actually had data written down on my topic. So you hit on that, Desiree. Thank you. Yeah, storing all that data in a way that you have access to.
That's the most glamorous part of the job, is the data storage.
Data. And then it's like, what do you do with it? Is it useful to keep collecting that data? That's where I think it gets really interesting, with getting data that you can make decisions from is like really the end goal for the quality team and for the lab. Is like, I can take data on this thing all day, but if we're not making any decisions from it, and if it's not beneficial to any of the teams I work with, do we need to take it? And I think that's a big like takeaway for this session from all of us. Like, work with your brewery where it's at and get the data that's beneficial to you and go from there.
Absolutely. And I had one last question, just as we end, kind of a couple minutes left to go. What does the day-to-day life as people, or work life for people who are working in lab and quality programs look like?
Early.
Very early.
Yeah.
Early in the morning. My day starts with PCR. We're usually centrifuging, or if it's a hazy boy, just pushing beer into tank the day before or the night of. And so I'll do a check on it to clear before packaging, go over all our packaging checks, grab samples from beer in process to plate, or to get dissolved oxygen. Data analysis falls in there as well. And there's little things. We also do IBU and SRM on finished package and in process, so that finds its way in there. But that's a usual day for me.
What about you, Desiree?
A usual day for me is a fun one. Nowadays, being in a startup, I wake up before the sun. A typical day for me, and it does vary, is 6 a.m. at work. So I wake up around 4. And oh yeah, sometimes 5. And then just depending, our schedule is so flexible now because there's only a few of us. If it's got to get done, we got to be there. So sometimes I come in at 2 in the afternoon. Sometimes I come in at 5 a.m. I come in, I do the daily cellar work, like everybody calls it something different, cellar log, cellar work. We call it a daily beer report. And I check on all the tanks, make sure all of our temps are in spec, all of our pressures are in spec. I check all the gravities, pHs of any active fermentations. I check the carb levels of any carbonated beers we have in the cellar. And then I will start on my cellar work for the day, which can range from anything from cleaning a couple tanks to, like today, I fully CIP'd the brew house and cleaned up some casks for our anniversary party. And sometimes it's a brew day. If it's a brew day, I might be cellaring. I might be doing a lot of the brewing, hands-on work there. If it's a brew day, that's when I get to do a little bit more lab work, and I get to do our yeast pitch calculations and pitch some yeast, get everything ready on the cellar end for the brewer. On a package day, I would be probably cellaring and jumping back and forth, checking all of our quality checks on the can line. Goodness, it just depends on the day. Some days I pressure wash the parking lot.
That was the point of my question.
I also do logistics too, if I didn't want to add that to the list. So today I shipped out an order. I'll do inventory. I'm also in charge of inventory for the month for the entire brewery. You never know what you're going to get. But when I was at Terrapin, it sounds about like Dallas's day, where it's wake up, figure out what you need to do as far as pulling in-process samples in the cellar, micro, PCR, SRM, turbidity testing. We did turbidity, get sensory panel going for the day, and then just, getting things done throughout the day that need to be done. And yeah, so just, it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think, and as we're wrapping up here, it's just after 7. Part of this whole building a lab and quality program. I think one of the main things that you all were so able to hit on every point of is it really goes from start to finish, and it can be as simple as engaging with everyone, making sure that they're on board with staying tight and consistent in their aspects and their jobs. Then as you start to add in these quality checks, these lab tests, it's real easy to go down the rabbit hole, but it is kind of all encompassing. And, that does have this final end result of great, consistent, delicious, brilliant, or hazy, hazy beer. So excellent. Darren asked one last question. What's the best way to engage / approach a taproom manager or another professional about pursuing an apprenticeship? And I'll put this over to Desiree and Dallas, but what I'll also say is, Darren, I believe it is on Friday that we are going to have a great Ask an Expert virtual session. So that might be a great question for that panel as well. But Dallas, Desiree, do y'all have any kind of, experience or advice here before we head out?
You can go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was like, I never knew. I started as a beer tender, so I guess that's kind of my takeaway is get in where you can and work to where you want to be. And don't be shy. I'm shy sometimes, but when it comes to beer and making good beer, just, ask questions and get involved. And the worst people can say is no, I found out. So.
Yep. And continuing on that, I can speak the same. I started working in the tap room, as I mentioned earlier, just like Dallas. I pestered them enough, and they gave me an internship, and then they gave me a job when I pestered them some more. And I can also speak to my past experience. The VP of operations at Terrapin started off as a cellarman and quality intern, part-time. And now he's the VP. And I think that's a span of all of 4 or 5 years it took him to do that. Not saying that's what'll happen, but pester. If you pester, they realize you really want it. Also, I know head brewers love to get these emails. I don't know about taproom managers or anything, but head brewers love to hear about people that want to come scrub floors for an apprenticeship, and mine especially. But if you're in the Atlanta area, Darren, I don't know if you are or not, but I know my brewery is hiring a hybrid role still, I believe. And you can apply. So that would be a hybrid tap room and brewery role. Yeah, just shameless plug.
And just in case, I know Atlanta Beer Boutique wrote it twice, that Ask an Expert panel is on Thursday, not Friday. Apologies for that. So,
gosh,
yeah. And I just had a nerdy conversation with what ended up being a brewery owner about water chemistry. And he was like, you should come look in a microscope. And I was like, okay. And that was almost 5 years ago. So, well, thank you so much, Dallas and Desiree, for really walking through the entire life of a brewery and lab quality program process. That was excellent. And thanks for everybody who, Darren is in Atlanta, FYI. So thanks for everybody that came.
Firemaker.com. Shameless plug. And you can email my head brewer, and he's always open for anybody willing to work.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, Bray.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Rapid Fraction. This was fun.
Oh, Atlanta Beer Boutique. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thanks, Dallas.
Yes.
Got you.